One Thursday afternoon, Chen arrested Maria Ramirez. He saw what he wanted to see. Just another target, another statistic. What he couldn't see was that this single act would land him in front of Judge Sarah Williams, the same judge who had turned her own wrongful imprisonment into a masterclass in exposing police corruption. They called her the Scale, because in her courtroom, justice wasn't just blind, it was inevitable. Officer Alex Chen adjusted his freshly pressed uniform in the rearview mirror of his patrol car, admiring how the morning sun glinted off his newly pinned badge. The Metropolitan Police Department parking lot was already filling up for the morning shift, but he'd arrived early, not out of enthusiasm for learning from his seniors, but to show them he was already a step ahead. First day on patrol, solo, he muttered to himself, practicing the confident smile he'd perfected through 4 months of field training. Time to show them what real police work looks like. As he strode through the precinct doors, several veteran officers nodded in greeting. Lieutenant Rodriguez, a weathered woman with salt and pepper hair and 23 years on the force, stepped away from the coffee machine to intercept him. "Chen," she called out, her tone carrying the weight of experience. "Got a minute before briefing?" Alex's smile didn't waver, though internally he fought the urge to roll his eyes. "Of course, Lieutenant," he replied, his voice honey-sweet but lined with steel. Rodriguez gestured to a quiet corner of the break room. "Look, I know you're eager to get out there, but remember what we discussed during training. This isn't River Creek anymore. The city's different, more complex. Take time to learn the neighborhoods, understand the community." "With all due respect, Lieutenant," Alex cut in, his smile tightening. "I graduated top of my class at the academy. I think I can handle whatever comes my way." The memory of his father's words echoed in his mind. A badge means authority, and authority means respect. Rodriguez's expression hardened slightly. "That's exactly the attitude I'm worried about, Chen." The briefing room door opened, and Captain Singh's voice carried through the precinct. "Roll call in 5. The morning passed quickly as Alex familiarized himself with his beat. He handled a shoplifting call with what he considered appropriate sternness, wrote 3 traffic tickets and broke up a heated argument between neighbors before it could escalate. Each interaction reinforced his belief in his own capabilities. It was early afternoon when the call came in. "Possible disturbance at Marshall Street and 4th, the dispatcher's voice crackled through his radio. "Female subject reportedly acting suspiciously near the convenience store." "Copy that," Alex responded immediately, already turning his patrol car toward the location. "Unit 247 responding." The scene he found seemed deceptively ordinary. A young Latina woman in business casual attire, standing near the store entrance, checking her phone. Maria Ramirez had no idea her life was about to intersect with Alex's in a way that would change both their futures. Alex approached with his hand resting casually on his utility belt, his stance broadcasting authority. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the entrance." Maria looked up from her phone, surprised. "Excuse me?" "We received reports of suspicious activity," Alex stated, his voice carrying the clipped tones he'd practiced for commanding respect. "What's your business here?" "I'm waiting for my brother," Maria replied, maintaining her composure despite her growing confusion. "He works at the dental office next door. We're meeting for lunch." "You just—" Alex's eyes narrowed. The answer was perfectly reasonable, but something in him bristled at her calm demeanor. In his mind, compliance meant nervous deference. "I'm going to need to see some ID." "Okay. May I ask why?" Maria's question was polite but direct. "I'm just standing here." "Ma'am, are you refusing to comply with a lawful order?" Alex took a step closer, his hand tightening on his belt. What happened next would be debated in detail during the coming days. Alex would claim Maria made a sudden movement. Video evidence would later show her slowly reaching for her wallet, clearly stating her intentions. But, in that moment, Alex saw what he expected to see, what his preconceptions told him to see. Minutes later, Maria Ramirez was in handcuffs, charged with resisting arrest while bystanders recorded the incident on their phones. Her brother emerged from the dental office to find her being placed in the back of a patrol car, his lunch break transformed into a nightmare. Perhaps not the last time ever, police officers went to addresses for their Pearl Harbor. Back at the precinct, Alex filed his report with confident flourishes, crafting a narrative that painted himself as a vigilant officer and Maria as an uncooperative subject who had escalated a routine interaction. He barely noticed the concerned glances from his colleagues as he described the incident in the break room. "Had to show her how we handle things in the city," he boasted, missing the way Rodriguez and Singh exchanged worried looks. "Can't let 'em think they can just ignore an officer's commands." Meanwhile, across town, Carmen Ramirez sat in the modest office of Daniel Lewis, a local defense attorney known for handling civil rights cases. Her hands trembled as she described the phone call she'd received from her son. "My daughter has never been in trouble," Carmen insisted, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "She's an accountant, Mr. Lewis. She was just waiting for her brother to go to lunch." Lewis listened intently, his expression growing more concerned as he reviewed the preliminary report and witness statements on his tablet. "The arresting officer is Alex Chen," he noted. "New to the force, it seems." "Does that help us?" Carmen asked hopefully. "It might," Lewis replied carefully, "especially since this case has been assigned to Judge Williams' court." Across the city in her chambers, Judge Sarah Williams was already reviewing the day's cases when Maria Ramirez's file came across her desk. The judge's sharp eyes moved methodically over the report, her decades of experience allowing her to spot the subtle inconsistencies, the places where the narrative felt too neat, too practiced. She paused on Officer Chen's name, noting it was his first solo arrest. Something about the language in his report caught her attention, the way he emphasized his authority and Maria's perceived defiance while glossing over the actual sequence of events. "Miss Parker," she called to her clerk, "please pull Officer Chen's training records and any available footage from this incident. I think we need to look at this one carefully." The next morning, as Alex strutted through the precinct, sharing his version of events with anyone who would listen, he remained oblivious to the gathering storm. He dismissed a senior officer's attempted advice about proper escalation procedures and laughed off another's suggestion that he might want to review his body cam footage before the hearing. "Trust me," he said, leaning back in his chair during lunch break. "Once Judge Williams sees how I handle that situation, she'll understand we can't let people think they can just question our authority whenever they feel like it." "Chen," Lieutenant Rodriguez tried one last time, "Judge Williams isn't the—" I know, he waved her off. "She's thorough, she's fair, she expects everything by the book, but at the end of the day, she'll understand that I'm just doing my job, keeping the streets safe." As he spoke those words, Judge Williams was settling into her chambers, preparing for what would become one of the most significant cases of her career. On her desk lay two files, Maria Ramirez's spotless record and Officer Alex Chen's incident report. Between them sat a USB drive containing multiple angles of video footage that told a very different story than the one Alex had written. The judge thought back to her own youth, to moments when authority had been wielded as a weapon rather than a responsibility. She pulled out her legal pad and began making notes, preparing for a hearing that would test not just one rookie officer's arrogance, but the very foundations of justice and accountability in her courtroom. The stage was set. In 48 hours, Officer Alex Chen would stand in Judge Williams' courtroom, armed with nothing but his misplaced confidence and a fabricated narrative. He had no way of knowing that his first solo arrest would become a turning point, not just in his career, but in the ongoing national conversation about power, prejudice, and the true meaning of justice. As the sun set over the city, three people prepared for the coming storm in very different ways. Maria Ramirez sat in her mother's living room, surrounded by family, trying to maintain her faith in a system that had already failed her once. Judge Williams worked late into the night, carefully reviewing precedents and procedures, knowing that what was coming would require all of her experience and wisdom. And Alex Chen went home to his apartment, polishing his badge and rehearsing his testimony, completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. Monday morning arrived with a weight of expectation hanging in the air. The courthouse steps were already busy with the usual morning crowd when Officer Alex Chen climbed them two at a time, his boots clicking against the worn marble. He'd spent extra time on his appearance. Uniform pressed to military precision, badge polished to a mirror shine, dark hair combed perfectly into place. Several of his colleagues from the precinct were already gathered in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood apart from the group, her expression grim as she watched Alex approach. "Chen," she called out quietly. "A word?" Alex checked his watch, still 20 minutes before the hearing. "Sure, Lieutenant, but make it quick. I want to review my notes one more time." Rodriguez led him to a quiet alcove. "Last chance to amend your report, if there's anything you want to clarify." "Seriously?" Alex cut her off with a laugh that echoed too loudly in the marble hallway. "I appreciate the concern, but my report is perfect. Everything happened exactly as I wrote it." "Even with the video evidence?" "Videos don't show everything," Alex replied dismissively. "Judge Williams will understand that we have to make split-second decisions in the field. Besides, I heard she's tough but fair." Rodriguez's weathered face tightened. "You're not listening." The heavy courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff emerged. "All parties in Ramirez versus the city. Judge Williams' court is now in session." Inside the courtroom, Maria Ramirez sat at the defense table with her attorney, Daniel Lewis. Her family occupied the first row behind her, her mother Carmen, brother Miguel, and several other relatives. They were dressed formally, their faces composed but tense. Judge Williams entered with measured steps, her black robe flowing around her. She was tall, with silver-streaked black hair and dark skin that showed its age in distinguished lines around her eyes and mouth. Those eyes, sharp and observant, swept across the courtroom as she took her seat. "Be seated," she said, her voice deep and clear. "We're here today regarding the matter of Ramirez versus the city, concerning an arrest made by Officer Alex Chen on Thursday afternoon. Mr. Lewis, you may proceed with your motion." Lewis stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss all charges against Ms. Ramirez and request an immediate investigation into Officer Chen's conduct during this arrest. We have video evidence from multiple sources showing that my client was fully compliant and that Officer Chen escalated the situation without cause." "Objection!" Alex blurted out, half rising from his chair. Judge Williams's gaze fixed on him. "Officer Chen, in my courtroom objections come from the attorneys, not the witnesses." Her voice carried a warning that made Alex sink back into his seat. The first video began to play. It was from a bystander's phone, showing Maria standing quietly by the store entrance, checking her phone. Alex's approach was visible, his body language aggressive from the start. "As you can see, Your Honor," Lewis narrated, "Mrs. Ramirez was simply waiting for her brother, causing no disturbance when Officer Chen approached her without probable cause." "That's not," Alex started to interrupt again. "Officer Chen," Judge Williams' voice cut through the air like a blade. "Interrupt these proceedings one more time without being addressed, and I will hold you in contempt. Is that clear?" Alex's face flushed. "Yes, Your Honor," he managed, though his jaw remained tight. As the morning proceeded, Lewis methodically dismantled Alex's report, pointing out discrepancies between his written statement and the video evidence. More witnesses came forward. The store owner who testified that Maria was a regular customer, Miguel's supervisor confirming their lunch plans, even a passing jogger who'd recorded part of the interaction on her phone. During a brief recess, the city's attorney, James Morton, pulled Alex aside. "This is bad," he whispered. "You told me you had probable cause. You told me the videos would support your story." "They're just twisting things," Alex insisted, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "That's what defense attorneys do, right?" Morton stared at him for a long moment. "Officer Chen, I'm going to recommend the city settle this case, and if I were you, I'd start thinking very carefully about what you're going to say when Judge Williams calls you to testify." The weight of reality was finally beginning to settle on Alex's shoulders, and for the first time since the arrest, doubt crept into his mind. He watched as Maria took the stand, her testimony painting a picture that bore no resemblance to the threat he'd convinced himself he'd seen that day. When court resumed, Judge Williams called Alex to the stand. As he walked to the witness box, his attempts to recapture his earlier confidence fell flat. He'd practiced his testimony, prepared his answers, but under the harsh fluorescent lights, with Judge Williams's penetrating gaze fixed on him, those practiced words felt hollow. "Officer Chen," Lewis began his cross-examination, "please explain why you felt Ms. Ramirez's behavior was suspicious enough to warrant investigation." Alex swallowed hard. The call stated. "The call we've established came from an empty pay phone," Lewis interrupted. "Let's focus on what you actually observed." "She was standing near the store entrance," Alex said, his voice smaller than usual. "It's a high-crime area." "Objection," Lewis cut in. "The crime statistics for that neighborhood show it's one of the safest in the city. Would you like me to enter those statistics into evidence?" "Sustained," Judge Williams said. "Officer Chen, please stick to your direct observations." The questioning continued, each of Alex's answers sounding weaker than the last. Lewis methodically exposed every inconsistency, every assumption, every moment where Chen's prejudices had colored his actions. "Final question," Lewis said. "In your report, you claimed Ms. Ramirez made a sudden threatening movement, yet in none of the videos, not the bystander footage, not your body cam, not the store security camera, does any such movement appear. How do you explain this discrepancy?" Alex felt sweat beading on his forehead. The courtroom was silent, waiting for his answer. He looked at Maria, at her family, at Judge Williams. The weight of truth pressed down on him. I thought she was going to..." He trailed off, unable to finish the lie. "You thought?" Judge Williams' voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the courtroom. "Officer Chen, in your report you stated with certainty there was no thought or believed. You wrote it as fact. Are you now saying you were mistaken?" Finally, barely audible, Alex whispered, "No, Your Honor. Ms. Ramirez did not make a threatening movement. I wrote what I thought would justify the arrest." But this admission was just the beginning. Detective Ana Torres from Internal Affairs took the stand next, revealing a pattern of systematic evidence tampering within the department. Corrupted body camera footage, modified training records, buried complaints, all pointing to a culture of protection and cover-ups. Lieutenant Rodriguez, in a surprising turn, testified about her own attempts to flag problematic behavior during training, only to have her concerns dismissed or records altered. "Alex isn't the disease," she testified, her voice heavy with years of frustrated silence. "He's a symptom of a system that rewards aggression and punishes accountability." As the evidence mounted, Judge Williams's expression grew increasingly grave. When all testimony concluded, she sat in silence for a long moment before speaking. "This court finds not only that the arrest of Maria Ramirez was without cause, but that it represents a broader pattern of misconduct that cannot be ignored. I am ordering an immediate external investigation into the Metropolitan Police Department's training and oversight procedures." Turning to Alex, she continued, "Officer Chen, your badge is suspended pending this investigation. Moreover, you will participate in a comprehensive retraining program focused on implicit bias and community relations, if you wish to remain in law enforcement at all." In the gallery, Maria hugged her mother, tears of relief streaming down both their faces. Alex sat motionless, the full weight of his actions finally settling on his shoulders. As people filed out of the courtroom, Judge Williams called Alex to her chambers. He entered tentatively, no trace remaining of his former swagger. "Officer Chen," she said, her voice softer now but no less powerful. "Today wasn't about destroying your career. It was about showing you that true authority comes not from a badge or a gun, but from the trust of the community you serve. That trust must be earned every day, through actions that uplift rather than oppress." 6 months later, Maria and Miguel resumed their Thursday lunches, though at a different location. The Metropolitan Police Department underwent a major overhaul, with new oversight procedures and training protocols in place. And Alex Chen, after much soul-searching and intensive retraining, became an advocate for police reform, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about the difference between authority and power. Judge Williams, watching these changes unfold, kept the files from the case prominently displayed in her chambers. They served as a reminder that justice, while sometimes slow, was indeed inevitable when good people found the courage to stand up and speak truth to power.